Hey there, folks, back again with another episode of Young Guys.
Young Guys.
Don't make fun of this, man.
I didn't say anything.
Mike Seeklander back at you with my good friend Austin. How are you today, man?
Good, man. It's good to see you here again.
Good to see you. So we had a bunch of questions and discussion points from some other videos, and they're like, hey, talk about gear. So we're going to talk about maybe some guns here in a second. But we'll talk about gear. But more importantly, before we start that, you have been competing with Team Wilson Combat for how long now?
8 years. Joined the team when I was 17.
17, and then you shot way before that. You shot with your dad since you were?
13.
13.
Yep.
Wow, man. So what led to your interest in all this shooting stuff?
We're avid hunters.
Yeah.
I've gone hunting with my dad since I was old enough to see over the dash of the truck.
Yeah.
Just kind of riding around on the logging roads in Western Oregon. Moved to Colorado, and obviously there's pretty strong hunting culture there.
Yeah.
And then it was Father's Day in February of 2011, and we were at the local Sportsman's Warehouse, and there was the local shooting group there that shot IDPA and USPSA. They had a flyer on the counter, and my dad had picked one up and thought, you know what, that might be kind of cool. Father's Day landed on that weekend, so that was what we were doing. We just went out to watch, and they said, well, if you brought a gun, you're gonna shoot today.
Yeah.
So we wound up just kind of going out there with, I think it was like an Uncle Mike's mag carrier and a full stainless SIG 220 in 45, and just went for it.
So you and your dad were hunting and shooting and doing things for years, and you both ran into competition shooting on the same day?
Yep.
Really?
Yep.
I did not know that, man.
Yep.
That is super interesting. And then you got hooked, and did your dad start competing more so than you, or did you both get into it then and your dad kind of helped fund your shooting?
Yeah, he's funded a lot of it.
Yeah.
You know, as I get older, I try and pick up more of the slack, but I have to give him total credit for, me being able to get to the point that I've gotten to over the years. And one of the coolest parts, like we did start at the same time, and one of the coolest parts is pretty much since I've started, since I was 13, at least one day of almost every weekend, we've gotten to do this together in some capacity.
Wow, man.
So it's led to a pretty cool relationship between me and him. We're super close. We've gotten to travel around the country and spend time with each other and compete with each other, and it's been a really cool journey.
Man, that's interesting. That's as many years as I've known both of you, I did not know that. That's a super interesting story. So, we had a discussion in a previous video where you talked about some of the training gear you're using for both IDPA and USPSA, the dark side.
Yeah.
So tell me, what are you running over there? Tell us about that just real briefly, and then I'll talk about my gear a little bit.
Cool. So what I've got here is my USPSA setup. Most of this was furnished by Precision Holster. I've got their mag carriers on here. I'll show that in a second. And the reason I'm running this level 3 CompTac holster is to use the gun and the equipment that I have that most closely mirrors what law enforcement uses. Out of the stuff that I have, this is the closest thing I've got. So I use this exact setup for my trainings and for USPSA competition. Same gun, same holster, and this is, like I said, a CompTac level 3. It's got the thumb brake, so it closely mirrors what they use. I've got it on a G-code adapter, so I can pop that off, put it somewhere else. I can throw another holster on here if I want to. Like I said, I got the double belt setup from Precision Holsters. They make really good gear. I can tune the angle of these, the offset, the position of them. I've got them set where they're comfortable for me. I can use this for 2 disciplines.
Yeah.
I can keep my gear consistent for both of those things. It might cost me a half-quarter second in competition on my draw, but when I get to a police training, there's less chance that I'll be fumbling around with this retention system. I can, again, use what they use. It gives me credibility and more buy-in, and the quicker I can get through that credibility and buy-in phase, the more quickly I can start delivering effective instruction and really build on that constructive learning process. So that's what I use for USPSA, again, shooting this gun in carry optics. And then for IDPA, whether I'm shooting CDP or ESP or CCP, or like my new CCP gun is the double stack Experior, I can use the same Precision Holsters holster for all those, because I shoot pretty much exclusively railed guns, and this is for a railed 5-inch 1911. From my compact all the way up to my full-size 5-inch CDP gun, everything fits in here the same.
Yeah.
So again, consistency across gear. I've got it the same setup, the same cant, the same offset for everything. My hand always knows where that gun is going to be when I go for the draw, and I think that's really important, like we talked about in one of the other videos. Consistency across platforms, across your carry gun versus your competition gun. I can kind of maintain that between the two sports to a certain degree by using the same setup for training in USPSA and then the same setup for all of my stuff that I use in IDPA.
Man, that is, I mean, your point on using that, because that's what the law enforcement groups that you're training might see, and establishing that initial credibility is super important. And I'm not sure if the viewers will get the importance of that, but I think they will if they've ever been a student somewhere, and as a student you see an instructor do the things that they're trying to teach you to do with the same thing you're wearing. And you know, my rule, it's funny, you're 25 now, you're kind of just getting into training and I think having some successes. I started training at about 25 as well, and then I went full-time with the Air Marshals just several years after that. So I've almost been full-time instructing the amount of time you've been alive. Are we sure we could be on the Young Guys episode? But I'll tell you, man, I'll give you credit in that statement, because establishing that initial credibility with your students is critical, especially as a young trainer, man, because you're a shooter. They know you can run a gun, but if you put a competition gun on and step up and go, you know, pop, 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 and they're like, yeah, but that's his competition gun. He's a competitor, and that's his competition holster. So I think that's a brilliant move. And I like the crossover too. I like the fact that, it's going to cost you maybe a quarter second, maybe a half second. You understand the pros and cons, because as competitive shooters, that's what we know really well. It's like, I know I can put this outside the waistband holster on with a stiff belt, and my draw process is going to be 2 to 3 tenths faster than if I put this guy in my inside the waistband holster and carry an appendix position or whatever else, man. So I love where you're going with that. By the way, I'm actually shooting this is the Precision holster as well. This is actually one of their newer variants that has kind of some unique features that makes it a little harder to pop out of the holster if you bump the gun, but if you draw the gun, it feels like there's no pressure, so you don't have the most advanced.
I know.
That's the Seeklander signature line.
I recognize it. I saw that
on that camera. It's beautiful. Just
it's great.
I mean, maybe someday, brother. I can. But anyways, and shout out to Precision Holsters. We both we know John. He's a competitor as well, so that's a great piece of gear.
Yep.
So man, here's a question I have as far as gear. We both have a gun with an Optic in front of us. We talked about and made some predictions in a previous video on Optic, but when you're working with a student that's shooting an Optic for their first time, how are you relaying the presentation of the Optic itself to find the dot? What are you talking about? What are you teaching them?
Yeah, optics are tough, and we went over it a little bit in one of the previous videos. It's not a magic solution to make you a better shooter automatically. You've got to put in the time and put in the work so that you're finding the dot quickly, and then learning to trust that dot throughout your recoil impulse, because it's kind of weird. When you're used to iron sights, they kind of track physically attached to the gun the same way all the time. Well, the dots just dancing around.
You watch the iron sights, because you can always see them.
Exactly.
And then the first time someone shoots a carry optic type gun, they dance around, but more importantly, oftentimes they disappear. So the dot goes gone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So getting used to that is tough. And one of the things that I run into with students that are new to dots is, how do I find the dot quicker? What are some tips and tricks you can give me to find that quicker, aside from just saying do dry fire? And one of the biggest things that I tell them is, when that thumb goes into that grip right there, my left thumb is indexed alongside the bore axis, or at least parallel to the bore axis. If I imagine that when I'm presenting that gun, I'm pointing at the target with that thumb, and it depends on your hand shape and your grip and how it ends up, but usually there's a pretty good physical index there. If they just imagine they're pointing that thumb, that dot will be at least in the right area. So that's their physical reference right there. This thumb should end up building that grip the same way and kind of pointing parallel to the bore to a certain extent. And that's a physical reference they can use to at least get in the right vicinity to find that dot quicker. Man,
I love that. And I'll add to your tip. One of the things that you're showing is, if you think about this, Austin, if the iron-sighted gun is in front of our face and we come onto the target at a different angle, we can always see the iron sights. But where if an optic is on the handgun as it comes onto the target, if we have an angle up or left or right position with the optic itself, that optic disappears in the window. So the more planed out the gun is, the better off we are. And the sooner we can get to that point where you describe it as pointing that thumb. We talked about our grip position a little different in a previous video, but the sooner we get that gun at this angle, the faster I'll find the dot, because the more the dot is high and bring it down into the window, or the dot is low, where with iron sights we can always see it. So here's my tip for you is, keep the gun at the final presentation point more planed out. And interestingly enough, what I found, and I'd be curious if you found the same thing in classes, if they know how to present a handgun with iron sights, assuming the red dot is mounted in the right spot in the gun, low, right? They'll probably find the red dot if they present the handgun and keep their visual focus on the target versus looking for the dot. Do you find people looking for the dot? And
and like you always say, doing the dot lasso. Yeah, you see that a lot, and it's because you're used to aligning 3 physical index points: your rear sight, your front sight, and your target. And you're going from that to superimposing the dot on your target, which translates into target focus. You're basically just putting that dot where it should be on the target, but you're not focusing on the dot. It just kind of ends up being there by virtue of doing the rep correctly. So you definitely see a lot of that, and when people lose that physical reference point, that's where a lot of them struggle. And that's why I was trying to find something that I could use as a physical index, instead of just saying, do the rep correctly. It's try and point that thumb. It doesn't always work, but I've had a lot of students come through and they say, I've had trouble finding the dot, and I say, point that thumb, and the next rep they're like,
there it is.
Okay.
That's interesting, man.
And I actually got that tip from a member of law enforcement that's local to me back in Colorado, and I just overheard them saying it at a match that we were shooting at together. She was instructing another shooter, and I overheard it, and it's
grab that.
And a lot of the stuff you were talking about earlier, as far as going through the progression of training, and I am new to this, but if I've ever seen farther, it's because I stand on the shoulders of giants, and growing up in this industry and just bringing in bits of information allows me to learn those lessons the easy way earlier on. So
you've had the unique experience of being around lots and lots of good shooters, because as you and your dad, which once again unique, you started out together, evolved and got better and better and better, and then you end up on the Team Wilson Combat, and they're everybody at Wilson Combat is a shooter. Right, they're all shooters. So if you're not a shooter, you won't fit in very very good amongst them. But then, man, all of the super squad shooters and people that and there's everybody is like, I invented this new technique, we're going to do this thing. No, but there's nothing new.
Nothing new in the last 30 years.
The fact that you've given credibility to people that you've learned from is really valuable, because that's where we all got everything, man. Even if I don't realize I got it from someone else to relay to students, I got it from someone else. That's the bottom line. So in your training classes, I know you do law enforcement groups and stuff like that. What are you seeing any trends? Are you seeing a lot of red dots in classes? Are you seeing certain trends in classes that stand out to you?
Definitely a lot more people, especially in law enforcement, adopting the red dots. Obviously going through their agency and the long adoption process, working through whoever they work for, it takes longer for them to be able to get on that train, but you're seeing it happening more and more and more. Because of that, you're seeing a lot more demand for that training, that specific red dot training. I mean, there are a lot of people that only do red dot classes now, just because the adoption rate is becoming so much higher. But that's definitely been one of the biggest trends that I've seen. Another trend that I've seen is seeking out training from people that traditionally law enforcement wouldn't have looked to, specifically competition shooters. And I always tell them, I can't teach you to stack on a door. I can't teach you to clear a house. I can't teach you tactics beyond shooting better. And the way I like to phrase it for them is, I'm buying you thought capacity in a bad situation. So if you're not used to, manipulating a firearm in a high stress situation, and you're not comfortable with it, then at least some of your thought capacity is going to be tied up with that gun in your hands. Do I know how to shoot? There's going to be some stress with that. Whereas, like, I'm pretty comfortable with this gun. If I'm shooting in a match, I'm not thinking about the gun, I'm thinking about what I'm doing.
Of course.
And if we can get members of law enforcement in that bad, stressful situation, more thought capacity applied to what they're doing, buying them time and thought capacity to make better decisions, apply better tactics that they learned from someone else, because I don't teach that. and I'm basically freeing up a lot of that for them.
Yeah, you're freeing up that mental bandwidth that they can apply in whatever the situation or scenario they're in is in. I think that's brilliant, man. But one of the things that you know, certainly I am a competitive shooter. I was also in law enforcement. I was also in the military, so I have some unique backgrounds there. But as a competition shooter, a lot of times I'll be in a defensive-only civilian group or a law enforcement group, you know, tactical, and I'll be like, hey, you know, is this stuff we're talking about a competition? Because I shoot a lot of competitions. Is a gunfight a competition? And they're like, wow, they think about it for a second. They're like, yeah, wait a second. Yeah, it is. Yeah, absolutely, man. You're competing directly with who you're fighting, whether it's a gunfight or a defensive situation. You're competing to get the gun out and get rounds on target. So all of the things that we talk about, man, that's what we do in competition. You know, we draw the gun fast, we present the gun fast, we find that we verify alignment fast, we pull the trigger as fast as we can without moving the gun. We do it when we're off balance, we do it when we're moving, we do it from seated position. So if you think about that, wait a second, in a fight, what's gonna happen? Well, I might be seated, I might be moving, I might be off balance. Yeah, hey, guess what? And that's, I think that's why you see the elite, you know, military units and groups calling on competition shooters for the last, you know, 30 years to improve their speed and accuracy. And and I think you're smart, man. If you don't have that experience, don't even attempt to teach tactics or even talk about tactics. No. Just make them good shooters, man.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
they're better people for them to learn that from than me. And competition isn't tactical training, but there are certain things that carry over. Like you were saying, decision making on the fly, off camber positions, compressed positions like sitting inside of a car. How often do we shoot out of, you know, the front seat of a car in competition? Pretty often. What's
the future, Austin? What do we have? What do we see from you in the future? Where do you want to take this training? Where do you want to take your competing? What does competing mean to you now? Is it just kind of a gateway to continue to develop skill, or is it, you know, where are you going to be in 5 years?
That's a good question. I'd love to do training full time. You know, the fewer concrete blocks I drop on my fingers, the better. It's something that I love to do. I'd love the instruction when I see a student get that light bulb moment, that, oh, now I get it, I've never seen that before, just that little nugget of information that totally changes, you know, their shooting career path for them. I love that. I love those moments. So it's a really fulfilling thing for me. And then as far as competition goes, doing well in competition definitely feeds training. You know, the better you do, the more people are gonna want to learn from you and work with you, which is great. But man, I love it. I love competing. It's what I've always done, and I've done it for a long time, even without having that added benefit of, oh, it can, you know, filter into a business for me. When I was able to get that, you know, national title last year, I told everyone it's a good start. You know, it's definitely not like, oh, I achieved this and now I want to move on to something else.
No, man.
It's a good start. That's one plaque on the wall, and I'd like to fill the wall. You know, it's what I love to do. I love competing. You know, it's fun when you don't win, but it's pretty fun when you win too. It's what I enjoy. It's what I grew up doing. It's part of who I am now. So I don't see myself stopping anytime soon. Focus might change. You know, in the balance of how much time I've got, focus might change to accommodate more training, just because it's something that's new to me. It's something that I'm still learning. It's a new pursuit for me, but it's definitely not gonna be an end to competing for me.
Man, in terms of shooting a handgun at a very high level of speed and accuracy, if you had to give our lovely viewing audience three tips, three things, hey, do this, this, and this to become a dramatically better shooter, what would they be?
So the most controversial thing I'll say is going to be right now, I believe that 80% of good pistol shooting is in your grip. And I wholeheartedly believe that. I think the last 20% is a balance between sight picture and trigger manipulation, which is totally dependent on your target difficulty, meaning distance and target size, but 80% in my eyes is grip. And whether you're shooting fast, whether you're shooting at distance, that was one of the biggest things for me in my evolution as a competitive shooter. I used to suck at distance shooting. You know, IDPA standard stages, used to eat my lunch. And I hated practicing it because I wasn't good at it, and I stayed not good at it, so I didn't want to practice, and it was that vicious cycle. So I started forcing myself at the end of every live fire practice session, put a target out at 40 yards
Yeah.
and just shoot zeros.
Yep.
And I would do a couple full mags, and I would just stand there and shoot, bang, 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 bang. And as I'm shooting, I'm trying to call my shots. And for the viewers that aren't familiar with that, that's the idea of where were my sights when that shot broke, and I should have a mental map of where the shots are going to end up on that
100%.
target.
Yep.
So it taught me that, and the fact that grip is incredibly important when you're doing distance shooting,
Yep.
because a lot of people tend to put all of their focus into sight alignment and trigger manipulation because it becomes much more important as you
Sure.
increase distance. But what they do is they relax their grip.
Boom. There
And
you go,
as
man.
they relax their grip, subconsciously, you still know that gun is going to go off, and your brain goes, okay, it's going to go off, crap.
Move the gun.
Yep.
Move the gun.
Yep.
Yeah. Man. So that's such a good way to put it. And that, I mean, literally, my foundational teaching method is, build a structure. You've heard that term from me.
Yep.
Build the structure on the handgun, build the structure on the rifle, build the structure on the shotgun, and the structure is the grip, folks. I mean, I'll add to your very, very well said tip there. People are always like, you jerk the trigger, it's your trigger control. I always tell people, good trigger control is good grip control.
Yep.
Because the trigger finger is not moving the gun.
Right.
This is what's moving the gun.
Right.
This is moving the gun. So we can stop this from moving the gun and pull the trigger without moving. That's it, man. It's a great statement. I love that.
And on that note, if those three fingers are gripping as hard as they can, if I'm maxed out here,
Yes.
I can't flinch more.
They can't move.
You can't go past
That's
100%.
right. Couldn't agree more, man. I
Can't
love
go
that.
past 100%.
Wise words for a young 25-year-old Austin.
Again, I've spent pretty much my entire formative portion of my life around people like you, picking up little bits of information here and there, and just shooting with good shooters
Yep.
has contributed more to my advancement in my shooting career than anything else. I've taken one class, and I was 13 or 14, and we had Bob Vogel come out. We did a class with him
Yep.
way back in the day. Learned a lot, but beyond that, it's just been what I pick up here and here and here by squatting with good shooters.
Yep.
It matches, and if you're paying attention and being mentally engaged to not just what you're doing when you compete, but what other people are doing. That guy shoots better than me. What did he do different?
Yeah, man.
And ask them. Ask those people at matches.
Right.
If you're going to a match,
Yeah, I agree.
Ask questions,
Yeah.
because pretty much all of them are nice people. Even if intimidating dudes like yourself,
Yeah.
you can be pretty intense on the range.
Yeah.
But 15-year-old me walks up and says, "Hey, Mike, why do you do this? Or how do you do this?"
Yeah.
And you were always super forthcoming and really helpful about it. So,
Yeah.
I would say 80% of it is grip. Don't be afraid to ask questions and find what works for you.
Yeah, and the question thing, I'll mirror that, man. I can't tell you how many times I'll go to my local club match, and I'll see shooters making mistakes. So sometimes I will go try to help them and tell them, but sometimes I'm like, I don't want them to feel like I'm telling them what to do,
Right.
But I'm like, God, I really, really hope this person approaches me and asks me how I just did what I just did, because I want to tell them.
Right.
And, I don't want to embarrass them. I don't want to feel like I'm being overbearing. So
Exactly.
ask questions all the
Yeah.
time. I love that, man. So, all right, folks, there you go. Another episode of Young Guys.
Young Guys.
I guess. Austin, you want to close it out? Tell them to subscribe and like and share and all that stuff, man.
Yeah, drop a comment, ask us some questions, reach out to us personally. We both have Instagram accounts, so if you can find us and ask us questions, again, super forthcoming about it. Like, subscribe, appreciate you tuning in for this one, and stick around because I think this might have to become a regular deal.
Absolutely.
So, thanks for tuning in, guys.
Good job, man.